In this chapter, we will learn how to allow a user to view all his emails in a hierarchy of directories such as inbox, sent, spam, archive, etc. This feature is possible by using a protocol called IMAP. All the leading email servers in the world, such as Gmail, give you access to IMAP so that you can use an email client such as Outlook or Thunderbird to view your emails in a hierarchy of directories. But why is IMAP necessary? Recall that in the last chapter, we received all incoming mails successfully, but they were stored in a raw form inside a file with no hierarchy. Incoming mails are stored in a single file, one after the other, with no conceivable hierarchy or listing. This isn't good for creating user-friendly GUI applications using email. That's why we use IMAP. The software that allows us to configure IMAP service is Dovecot. In this chapter, we will learn how to configure and install Dovecot and use tools to view our mails in a hierarchical listing. The first step is to install Dovecot and a few modules of Dovecot that we need. The Dovecot that we just installed will be used by Postfix to push incoming mails into. Dovecot will also speak to MySQL for authentication. We will change a lot of files inside the etc Dovecot directory. So let's take a copy of the whole directory. The first file to configure is etc dovecot.conf. By default, Dovecot supports three ways to access mails: IMAP, POP, and LMTP. We will not be dealing with POP anymore. POP is an outdated protocol that isn't used anymore. IMAP is what we will use when an email client wants to connect to Dovecot. But additionally, we will also use LMTP or Linux Mail Transfer Protocol so that Postfix can push incoming emails to Dovecot. You see, all emails will come to Postfix first since Postfix is the mail transfer agent. Mail transfer agent from one server doesn't know how to communicate with Dovecot on another server. So emails will first enter our server via Postfix. But instead of storing them, Postfix now needs to push the emails to Dovecot, which will do the storing. This is where LMTP comes in. So we configure Dovecot to support IMAP and LMTP only and to ignore POP. The first two lines configure Dovecot to run as user mail and group mail. So the owner of all the files created by Dovecot will be that user and group pair. As a result, we will later need to create directories with permissions. Mail_home configures that emails be stored inside the var mail directory, which is similar to what Postfix does. But in addition, it also uses subdirectories for domains and addresses. For example, if we were to send an email to henry@mail.tech101.in, then the mail will be stored in var mail.tech101.in henry. %d is a placeholder that will be replaced with the domain, whereas %n will be replaced by the account name. First_valid_UID forbids us from setting mail_UID to a user with a numeric ID less than 4. That is, it does not allow us to set mail_UID to any number between 0 and 3. Or in other words, all those users with high privileges, such as a root. Next, we will configure the file etc dovecot conf.d 10-mail.conf. The mail location should be changed to maildir:var mail %d%n. Now we need to create the subdirectory for each of the subdomains on which we want to support emails. The subdirectories for each user will be created by Dovecot automatically. As a result, we should take care of the permissions set on the created directories. Our course configures emails for the domain mail.techmono1.in, so that's the only subdirectory we need to create inside var mail. After creating the subdirectory, we have changed the owner of that directory to mail user and the owning group as the mail group. We have already seen the user and group in the chapter on configuring postfix and MySQL. Now we are going to configure authentication, including tampering with some necessary security. The low security will be temporary for this chapter, and we will plug the holes in the chapter on security. Let's edit the etc dovecot conf.d 10-auth.conf. The first change is to allow plain text authentication. Plain text authentication allows passwords to be sent as is without any ciphering, that is, without encrypting it in some form. Don't worry, even though the password is not ciphered, the entire connection between the client and the server will be encrypted when we configure SSL in the security chapter. The combination of both password ciphering and SSL is an overkill, so we eliminate ciphering. Auth_mechanisms line should also list plain as one of the options, although there can be other options like login, digest MD5, cram MD5, and several others. Since you want to use MySQL to authenticate users rather than the Linux system itself, you will instruct Dovecot to use SQL extension instead of the system extension. So let's configure the SQL extension itself. For the user DB section, we will uncomment the section that says driver equals SQL and use the section that says driver equals static. We do this because we do not have any user-specific settings for now. Next, we configure the SQL queries themselves. First of all, we set the driver to MySQL, since that is the database system we are using. Next, the connect key should contain the setting that allows us to connect to the MySQL server on our server. We connect to the database on the server itself, hence the 127.0.0.1 address. Then we supply the database name, username, and password to connect to the database for our email hosting. The default _pass_ scheme should be SHA-512 crypt. Recall that when we stored passwords in the database, we had used the encrypt function to store the password in a secure manner. That encrypt function was using SHA-512 crypt. When a user logs into Dovecot, their entered password will be encrypted using SHA-512 crypt, and then this encrypted cipher will be compared against the one stored in the database and matched. Password_query should contain the query that returns the email address and the password for the user who logs into Dovecot. Let's now configure the file named 10-master.conf. We are looking for the section where we configure IMAP. We first ensure that IMAP protocol is started on the port 143. An email client like Thunderbird can connect on this port to retrieve emails. Next, we configure the LMTP service. The line Unix_listener tells Dovecot to create a file named where spool postfix private Dovecot LMTP. This file is a conduit that will be used by postfix to pass all incoming emails to Dovecot. The user, group, and mode parameters tell Dovecot that this file should belong to a user and a group named postfix, and that only the user postfix should be able to read and write to the file. That's the number 6 in mode. 4 for read and 2 for write. The permission for everyone else is set to 0.
In a little while, we will configure postfix to be able to use Dovecot for authentication. So we need to create 2 more conduits.
Finally, we configure another service called auth_worker, changing the user to mail. We can test all the configuration by restarting Dovecot service. Dovecot is up and running, but it is not yet communicating with postfix. Why? Because postfix doesn't know about Dovecot yet. We need to configure postfix to hand over all incoming emails to Dovecot. We need to do that in postfix's main.cf file. But because we have a working email configuration, let's make another copy of main.cf just in case. That way, we'll have a working version of main.cf to revert to. In main.cf, we configure a setting called virtual_transport and set its value to the LMTP conduit used in Dovecot's configuration. The settings virtual mailbox base, virtual minimum UID, virtual UID maps, and virtual GID maps are of no use anymore since postfix isn't going to store emails. Let's delete them. Now we save the file and restart postfix. It's time to test our IMAP and Dovecot. We will use Telnet to test our Dovecot server. You can see the prompt issued by Dovecot. We connected to it on port 143, which we had configured earlier. After the *OK message, the prompt waits for us to type a command. The first command to type is the one to log into the server as a user. We will log in as Henry. We should use the same credentials as recorded in our MySQL database. Before we type the command, we need to remember something unique to IMAP. All commands must be preceded by an identifier. This identifier is usually a single letter or a number, but it needs to be there. Let's not dive into why such an identifier is needed, since we will not be using Telnet to check our emails. We will use desktop clients and webmail clients. For this chapter, just remember that each IMAP command is prefixed with an identifier and a space. To log in, we use the login command followed by the username and the password and preceded by the ID. I will use numbers before every command. Remember that to log in, we will use the full email address along with the part after the @ symbol. And we have been written the prompt that says OK. Preceding the OK is the number we had used as the prefix to our command. This prefix is what allows us to match the command to its output. Next, we select our inbox so that we can see if there are new emails. Along with the OK output, we see a line that says 0 exists, which is just to say that there are no emails. Let's send Henry an email from Gmail. Let's issue the select command again. And we see that 1 exists. To see the email, we issue the fetch command. The parameter 1 to the fetch command tells Dovecot to fetch the first email in the inbox. The all parameter is used to fetch some of the most commonly seen fields from an email. We can see the following results in the output: the date and time of the message, the sender's address and the subject. That is what you usually see in an inbox listing. And that's it for this chapter. We have used Dovecot to configure incoming mails and store them in a hierarchy. Our work with the command line is done for now. In the next chapter, we will learn how to configure a GUI-based email client to use our email server. We will use Mozilla Thunderbird, but the principles are the same for every email client. See you there.